Okay, so thanks for coming to this session. My name is Anjali, and I'm a visual artist and an accidental analog game designer and a nonprofit consultant. Over the past 20 years, I've really focused on creating moving experiences as a craftsperson and working for or with nonprofit organizations as a writer, graphic designer, survey researcher, and a lot of other things. And what I'm here to do today is to simply offer a different angle from which to think about games for change. Rather than coming at this from the game or entertainment industry, this entire talk is coming at this subject of impact and change from the social sector and nonprofit world. We have only about 15 minutes, so if I don't get the timing right on this, just let me know, and we can always continue the conversation outside. They have, okay, great. I will try not to take up some of your break before the 5 o'clock session. Okay, so about a decade ago, I started working at an organization called Nonprofit Finance Fund. And Nonprofit Finance Fund is a nonprofit consultant and an impact investor. They make impact investments, which are a kind of investment that requires a financial and social return. And at the same time, I moved from making paintings to making things like this. I describe my work as a kind of participatory installation. They're kind of like unique works of art that function like one-of-a-kind game boards. And the games are all different, but they guide participants in different ways through an exploration of fate or opportunities for learning or action. Without going into a lot of detail today about my work as an artist, I just want to share with you why my work in the nonprofit sector has made me a better game designer, a better designer, and a better artist. So really, everything started with me asking a few really important questions. Are good intentions enough? Are good experiences enough? Are we actually making a difference in what we do every day? What kind of difference actually counts? And probably over all of this stuff is, how do we know we're actually making a difference? Now, these questions are actually easier to answer for some organizations over others. And for those of you who've been here for the last 2 days, we know that health and education are a little easier, right? You've heard a lot about health and ed tech games and how those are improving health outcomes or student test scores or student attendance. But let's look at a harder case, like an art museum. Most of us in this room probably believe that the Met matters, but if you ask yourself why it matters and what difference it's actually making in our communities, the picture starts to get a little bit more blurry. And that's not to say that the Met is not making an impact, but we don't necessarily know how they're measuring it and its true effect on community revitalization, neighborhood economics, and all of those other things. And on the nonprofit side, foundations and funders are actually pressuring organizations to increasingly prove their value. These are a couple of graphs from the organization that I am currently consulting with and have worked for in the past, Nonprofit Finance Fund. And what you're essentially seeing here is that funders, especially foundations and government, are asking nonprofits to show that their services are actually making a difference. And they're actually tying their funding to it. So for example, right now, it's still pretty common for homeless shelters to receive funding for meeting certain productivity metrics, like, say, filling a certain number of beds in a shelter every week. But increasingly, nonprofits are being asked to show that their activities are directly responsible for pretty significant changes, like reducing the number of homeless individuals in their community, particularly after they've received services. And so this is a growing dialogue. You can see that shift, right, from filling beds to actually wanting to actually see a meaningful difference in our communities. And those are things like prevention, which you've probably heard a little bit about in the health themes today and yesterday, lessening the effects of social challenges or actually ending them. And those are big, incredibly meaningful goals that both nonprofits and foundations and other kinds of funders really want to see happen. But it's also about money. Funders want to know that their dollars are making a difference, especially when funding gets tight. And even though profit, quote unquote, is important for any sustainable organization, whether you're a nonprofit or not, it's like a rolling drum for that moment, right? Even though actually the word profit is important for all organizations, we know that nonprofits can't actually be measured. Their effectiveness can't actually be measured based on their profits, right? So what are we left with? Without impact measurement, right now, what we have is a situation where nonprofits are typically held to efficiency measures. They're asked, which often actually creates what I would call a race to the bottom, essentially, that pressures nonprofits to spend less and less and less towards their mission. And that does not necessarily mean impact either. So this is a good thing. We're hopefully moving towards a world in the nonprofit sector where we can envision impact measurement that will allow us to bypass any conversations about efficiency measures and profit and really start thinking about what matters and funding fairly for it. So for the rest of this session, I'm going to go through a few kinds of tools that nonprofits use to actually map impact. One caveat, there's actually not one approach to this, so full disclaimer on this. These tools are often put out there, but when people go back to their desks and sit down and actually work on them, you will do all kinds of magical things that people haven't invented yet. So bear that in mind. These are really just guideposts and tools to think through the core elements. And there are a few core elements to what a meaningful sort of map of impact looks like. At the most basic, what you see here is a sort of rigorous and critical approach to logic and challenging your assumptions. From that point of your intervention, the action that you're actually taking in the world, as it ripples out into the community, on every single step of that chain, what do you expect to happen, and does it happen, and is it getting you where you want to go? Okay, so the first tool is super simple. It's just asking yourself a set of really simple questions in this logic chain. What's the problem that you want to solve? How do you want to solve it? Why do you think your solution is going to work? What do you think is going to make it more or less likely to succeed? And how will you know that it actually worked? And that last one's actually pretty tricky because you might look at that and think, oh, well, you know, in my community, we'll see fewer homeless individuals. But it's baked into that is a series of steps to get there. And typically, organizations don't just look for that last indicator. They want all of the indicators that chain together to get to that final outcome. And still, finally, at the end of this, all you need to be able to figure out how to actually identify whether you're getting to your goal and you actually solved it. So that's that last step, which is often very elusive. So some of you may have seen this before. This is a traditional tool used in the nonprofit sector. It's called a logic model. And it's a little bit more complicated than the previous one, but you can kind of see that the same elements are there. A logic model is basically a common framework that's used to clarify how an organization's resources, programs, the volume of its activities, which are called outputs, its medium-term, more lasting effects, which are called outcomes, all drive towards a long-term goal. And even though, just one sort of point on this, even though it's structured in a linear way, it might actually not work that way in reality. You might actually skip around to get your answers. Another one, and this is a lot of stuff on one slide, so look at it at a high level, don't read every word, is what's called a theory of change. Some of you may have heard of this one as well. This is also very commonly used in the nonprofit sector. It is exactly what it says it is. It provides a theory for how a change occurs and often takes a structural approach that looks at the ecosystem of the actors, the activities, the resources needed to make that change happen. And it has some elements of a logic model, but it's a little bit more spatial. For example, to end homelessness in a city, an organization might conclude that it needs a holistic solution. We need to build housing. We need to run shelters. We need to run workforce development programs. We need to advocate for a higher minimum wage. We need to think about housing policy in our city. And then it basically looks at that, structures all those programs, and it identifies where it fits within that ecosystem. Sometimes it might be running those programs itself. Sometimes it might be looking at that ecosystem and partnering with other organizations to do that. And the last word I wanted to just say here is on measurement. There are a lot of different ways to approach impact measurement, but in this structure, the first step is really identifying what information indirectly or directly tells you that you're achieving your goals at every stage of your change process. For example, an organization seeking to reduce homelessness in its city might see an indicator that they may not be on the right track is that clients aren't able to get and keep permanent housing. To be really simplistic, an associated metric for that might be the percent of total clients placed in permanent housing who returned to a situation of homelessness. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, but the more important thing is that kind of data, if you're collecting it on your programs, you can actually start identifying whether your programs are working. Okay, so games. Let's get back to games. At the beginning, I warned you that I would be approaching this conversation from the social sector side rather than the game side, but I wanted to bring games back into this. Games are a part of the social sector family, and we've seen throughout even the last 2 days that they inherit some of the opportunities and challenges of the sector that they're in, whether they're in arts or a healthcare organization or the environment. And sometimes it inherits its challenges too. And there are a lot of measurement challenges. I won't go into all of them here. You can see them pop up on the screen. But they run from ethics issues to the challenges of controlled experiments to whether things are measurable, whether they should be measured, so forth and so on. The list goes on. But games also bring possibilities and opportunities to the social sector family here. For games that have tech platforms or online environments that are central to their process, they are at a wonderful advantage in some ways. Because your data collection on your users is a part of your programs. Now ask a homeless shelter if they are doing that. It's a totally different situation. Their services, what's inherent in their services is one-on-one services with their clients and a building or a set of buildings. Capturing data on their clients is actually seen as overhead by a lot of funders. So they have this whole set of challenges to actually even develop the systems to measure and collect data on their clients. Games with tech platforms also have the capacity to collect longitudinal data, which is a huge challenge, particularly in some environments where you're not able to actually sustain a relationship with your clients. Games actually have the opportunity to bridge that gap and potentially provide resources and insight for nonprofit organizations. And the last thing I just want to say on games on this slide is that they get, and actually was mirrored a couple of times already earlier today, is that game designers and developers have a lot of insight into human behavior. And I can't count the number of times I've sat in conversations with folks who are trying to think about theories of change, and it comes back to human behavior and understanding human behavior. So let's take a quick step back before I end. There are really... There you go. Okay. So there are really 2 points that I really want you guys to leave with if you're thinking about measuring your impact in your work a little bit more carefully. And they really both have to do with perspective. The first one is that the nonprofit sector has a tremendous wealth of knowledge about measuring impact, and looking at the resources there can offer you a mission perspective in contrast to a media or tool or process perspective. And by doing this, you might actually find that when you start looking at the change that you want to see happen, you might not end up actually having everything be revolving around a game. It might be that you start doing completely different things that are unrelated to games around your work. The other thing to consider from a perspective is how to leverage your game design skills in unexpected ways. And this picture shows an exercise I did with an organization in its community to better understand its needs. And I created a fun interactive event and applied game design thinking to help them surface challenges, strategies, solutions to inform their programs. And you all have those same skills. You are not just game designers, you are game design thinkers. And you can use those unique skills to develop processes to help improve your own thinking around organizational philosophy, as much as you are doing that with users or the people who you want to play the games that you make. So that is it. Thank you. I I'm welcoming anyone if you want to email me and you want to get these slides afterwards. I have these and I have some other resources to actually help you think about theories of change for your own work.